Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to join us at the Scholarships and Bursaries talk, How to Assess a Family's Finances. As I'm sure you're all aware, we're certainly all aware, school fees have rocketed compared to salaries over the past several years. Fee inflation currently standing at probably a conservative estimate of 8%. Harrow, where Dr. Philippa Davies is from, who I'll introduce in a second. Harrow charge £50,000 plus per annum for boarding fees. And Christ Hospital, where Luke Walters is from, charges £41,000 per annum for boarding fees, which sounds cheap in comparison. So that's what we're looking at. 1/3 of pupils in the private sector receive some kind of fee assistance, so says the Independent Schools Council. And many parents who themselves were educated privately can't afford to do the same for their children and are looking for creative ways, which might include a bursary or a scholarship, to find ways of affording the fees. With me to discuss all of this morning, I'm delighted to introduce, first of all, Dr. Philippa Davies, who has taught maths and statistics since 1993 at Harrow School and master in charge of scholarships and bursaries. And Luke Walters, who's deputy head at Christ Hospital School in Sussex and is an English teacher as well. Finally, and most importantly, Camilla Smiley, who is one of my colleagues at the Good Schools Guide, who is also our expert on scholarships and bursaries and can really help give an overview on the landscape and the situation. So I'm going to start by just asking Luke and Philippa what kind of financial assistance is available at their two schools. And the reason why it's useful to have both Harrow and Christ Hospital here is not only are they extremely generous with their bursaries and their scholarship awards, but they are also quite complicated. So it's very useful for all of us, I think, to hear what they have to say. And I could perhaps start with Dr. Davies, if you wouldn't mind explaining how you do things at Harrow.
Does this switch on?
Yes, it should be on.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, so at Harrow, we have about 830 pupils in total, and that means that we have an intake of about 160 each year, 160 year 9 and about 20 year 12. In that intake of 160 plus 20, we will allocate about 25 to 30, the equivalent of 25 to 30 school fees, the value of 25 to 30 school fees. But it is spread over many more than 25 to 30 students because the level of bursaries that we allocate will vary from absolutely everything from 10% to 100% plus. So we very much find that our applicants request very small bursaries just because they can't quite afford our fee, to perhaps the middle level bursary, 40, 50%, for parents who perhaps could afford a day school fee but can't necessarily afford a boarding fee, right up to the 100% for very disadvantaged students. So we have a complete mixture in terms of financial support that's available.
Thank you, Dr. Davies. But before I let you stop there, many of you have maybe have read the Harrow website. Your scholarships have got different, or your bursary awards even have got different titles. Your scholarships have got different titles. Could you perhaps explain to our audience how that works? You know, the scholarship element, the bursary element, that side of things.
So our scholarships and bursaries are now completely separate. That's a relatively recent move forward, so it's about 3 years old. Our scholarships themselves are given for very specific talent, so specifically academic or specifically music or a particular sport, and they are not means tested and they are all worth 5%. All scholarships, 5%. All bursaries, which are separate from scholarships, are means tested, and they range from anything from 10 up to 100. So they can top up a scholarship, but they can be standalone bursaries as well. It is fair to say that most of our bursary recipients are probably in the ballpark of being scholarship level. They may not be actual, it might be a little bit more potential, but they will be talented individuals in some way. either in a particular field, such as academic or sport or drama, art, music, things like that, could be character. So we certainly recognise leadership qualities and strength of character as a reason to award a place and a bursary to an individual. Our bursaries are, as I said, they're means tested, and they really are means tested. So we don't award a bigger bursary because somebody is more talented. If we feel we're going to award a place and a bursary, the value of that bursary is on a means tested basis. So it's done on financial consideration only. The process have differing timelines. So our bursaries are when you apply for a place, you declare that you need a bursary. And all of that assessment and analysis is dealt as part of the admissions process. Our scholarships are usually a little bit extra on top, or are something that happens much later. So scholarships tend to be something that's dealt with in year 8. A pupil going for a scholarship may already have a place, may already have secured a bursary, and it's just something to recognise their talent, a title. In a very small number of cases, the scholarship route can be their way to get in very, very late in the day and secure a bursary. So the very final point of securing a place and possibly securing a bursary could be through the scholarship, but the vast majority are done through admissions earlier on.
Brilliant. That was such a clear explanation. Thank you. Luke, do you think you can follow that?
Not sure that I can, actually. I'll do my best. We have a slightly different setup at CH, which is what we affectionately call, know Christ Hospital as being. We have I remember this time last year being called a mature bursary programme because it's been in existence for some time, since 1553. So it's pretty stable in that respect. 75% of our students will be on some form of bursarial provision. So across the school, 75% of our students will be having some financial impetus from the school in order to make sure that they can pay the fees to get there. 50% of our students are paying less than 10% of the fees. So it's a really significant bursarial support programme, and probably, without blowing our own trumpet, the most comprehensive in the country. That said, it operates very differently. It is a different sort of school as a consequence. So we have students from all socioeconomic backgrounds. We have students from all sorts of cultural, ethnic backgrounds. It is a really diverse environment in which to work and in which to live for the students. And I say to live because there are 900 boarders in the school. Every single child from year 7 through to year 13, every single child from year 7 through to year 13 is a full boarder in the school, bar a very small number of day pupils who are, the majority of whom are the children of teachers in the school. So we begin assessment about now in year 6. So students who are interested in coming to the school will do a CAT test, computer test. At this stage, they will then come in about January, the beginning of what we call the Lent term, so just at the beginning of that term there, spring term to everyone else. They will come in, they will do a suitability for boarding assessment, which runs over two to 3 days, so we can get a really good sense of those children, their likes, their needs, their challenges, all of those different things. And then at the end of that, we select our cohort, and our cohort for year 7 is normally around the 80-90 mark. It goes up as the years go up in the school. And our cohort for year 9, what we call our lower Erasmus, that's probably around, we would have an intake of about 20 students just to supplement the students who are already in place. We have very few scholarships because the majority of our students are on some sort of form of financial support already. And I would echo what's already been said. As a consequence of the cost of living crisis, we are having far more interest in this. I think it's increasing, and that makes sense as well with the number of people we've got in front of us. Grace, I hope that covers the majority
That's
of the
also
territory.
excellent. Really helpful. I hope everyone found that helpful. I thought it was very clear. But Camilla, however clear that may be, what we've heard from both Luke and Philippa, that ultimately you apply when you apply for a specific entry level, whether it's 13 plus or 11 plus. What, behind the scenes, what do you have to do about getting a bursary? What should you be doing to prepare? What would these parents, when would you start to prepare? And is there any preparation to be done?
Good question. I think the first stage of preparation is coming to a day like today and talking to lots of different schools about what they can offer your child without thinking about the financial implications of that. I mean, if you are going to need a bursary in order to access the schools that would be right for your child, then that will quickly become clear. But first of all, you need to work out what these schools might be and whether, for example, you are a family that would benefit from boarding, whether you are a family who might prefer a local day option, what kind of bursary offering might there be in your area for that. So I think early preparation is much more about working out what school is going to be right for your child rather than thinking about the finances. And then, okay, well, we think we're going to need a boarding school. We know that he's really sporty. It's going to need to be within 2 hours of London, whatever it is. Now we need to start talking to schools about how their bursary offering works. And then I think it's just about getting your paperwork together, really, and making sure that you know what money you've got and where it is and how you're going to provide all this evidence that you need to provide at the stage when you're going through the means testing process. So a little bit like if you were applying for a mortgage, say, there's going to be a certain amount of paperwork that you need to show. And so getting all of that straight, getting your affairs straight, working out where everything is, I think will be good for the mechanics of the application when it actually comes.
Yeah, that's boring, but good advice. Now, what about, so we have heard from both of you that you have to apply when you apply at the fixed point of entry, but we also know, perhaps not so much at Harrow and Christ Hospital, but at some schools you can apply for an occasional place and perhaps you've missed the boat or you've not been in the country or you suddenly realise that actually you could afford it a bit. Do you ever find that you can offer bursaries at another entry point apart from 11 plus or 13 plus? And perhaps I could ask Philippa first.
In theory, yes. In practice, that's very, very dependent on how much space and whether we have any available bursary funding left. So it's a bit of a gamble, and it's never one that we'd recommend, but it is always worth asking the question because you never know what situation a school will be in and whether they have a spare place or whether they have spare money. So generally our advice would be, if you can come through the standard admissions process on the standard timeline, that will always maximize your chances of getting the bursary that you would be eligible for.
Excellent, thank you. And now I'm going to ask something slightly separate. And I think Philippa answered this a little bit when she was speaking about how Harrow operate. But are we therefore saying that bursaries, unlike scholarships where you've got to be brilliant at something, bursaries also, it kind of matters that you're really good at something if you're going to get the funding? Is that the bottom line here, Luke?
I think there's two responses. There's the response that's the broader piece that I'll Camilla to speak about. From a CH perspective, not in quite the same way. In terms of bursaries for us as a school, it is about the academic initially, and it's about, I think you quite nicely commented on character, that element. Yes, outstanding, but we also understand in some of those testing environments, our introverts don't always stand out, and they are just as important as our extroverts who will perform really well in interviews and in panels and on things like this. So it's really important that we're identifying those. It is always helpful if you have a child who does have skill in music or sport or drama or all those different things. But for us, that's not an absolute. It's not going to definitely guarantee you a bursarial place.
I think that's very reassuring, but I'm interested to know, again, on preparation, Camilla. So if you were a parent here, sitting here today thinking, well, I really do need to stand out. I'm not necessarily extrovert. I am introvert. I have an introverted child. Is there anything you would be suggesting to parents at an earlier stage of how to prepare their child to stand out for that bursary application or scholarship application?
I went to a school the other day who will remain nameless, who I walked into their music room and there were no fewer than 6 double basses lined up along the wall of the music room. Because of course, the joke always is that if you want your child to get in on the music scholarship, then give them the double bass because no one else plays that. Except apparently they're all now playing the double bass. I think in a way, Grace, it might come the other way round, that if your child, it emerges probably at their state primary school that they do have a particular talent for or aptitude in or interest in either the academic side of school life or music or sport, then that might be what brings you to the conversation about independent schools in the first place. And, if you've got a child who you think would really thrive in that slightly, that bigger environment or a boarding environment, then often I think we find that families who are looking for bursaries do have a child who in some way has risen to the top in their field or in terms of their sort of curiosity about school. So I think, yes, obviously, as soon as you decide you want a bursary, you need to start thinking about how you're going to get them in. But equally, it might well be that you have a slightly exceptional child in the first place.
Yes, please do.
I just wanted to add that what can you as parents do with your child if you're sort of seeking a bursary or place at school? If your child is showing a love of something or a passion of something, what you can do is encourage that. And it doesn't matter what that's in. Please don't force them to have piano lessons if they hate the piano. If they love gardening, encourage that. What comes across more strongly than anything else is when a child is genuinely interested and passionate about something. And when you see that in a child, it doesn't matter whether you do that in your school or not. You know that that child is going to be passionate and interested about other things. They're going to have a curiosity and they're going to have motivation to get involved. So I think as parents, please just encourage them and facilitate them to do the thing that they love already.
Oh, thank you. That's transformative bursaries. I wanted to ask you, Philippa, about this because we hear a lot about transformative bursaries, something which is associated with 100% provision or perhaps even more than 100% provision for very disadvantaged families. Can you just explain what these are and how they work?
So I think what we mean by transformative bursaries are the very high bursaries. They, in theory, don't work any differently from the lower quantity bursaries in terms of how they are awarded. So they are still awarded through the admissions process. So if somebody applies, registers for a place with us, there is a line on the registration form that says, do you need a bursary? You say yes, and you're asked to make an estimate of it. That is only an estimate just for us to have a guide about what you're thinking. The actual means testing will come up with a level, and if it's high, it's high. Where perhaps the slight difference with very high bursaries maybe is that there are some additional support with costs. All of our bursary candidates actually have support with the cost of a Surface computer. Our high bursary, so 75% and upwards, will also have considerable cost with uniform. Our very high bursaries, 95 and upwards, will also have things like pocket money as part of their bursary. For all bursary holders, they have access to some extras to help them with things that they may want to do to enhance the school experience. So that could be music lessons. It could be somebody who's amazing at a sport and money can be used for them to go on a training trip or a tour in that particular sport. And that can happen whether they're on very high or very low. So there are certain levels where the extras will kick in. Does that answer?
That does answer the question. I hope everyone's clear about that. Then we're left with, so transformative bursaries sound very exciting, and let's just hope you can find the right people. But where does it leave the squeeze middle, the professional classes that aren't earning nearly as much as they need to afford the fees? Luke, do the sort of squeeze middle feature at all in your people who you offer bursaries to?
Absolutely. And we have a range of different bursarial provision that means that people from all backgrounds can come to the school. And I think Camilla spoke about it earlier, the paperwork element that comes into this is where that becomes significant, because we assess thoroughly, we assess the financial position of parents as they come into the school, as their child comes into the school, so we have an idea of where that child's bursarial provision will sit. But that's also evaluated throughout the child's school career, that there are points we all know. I mean, this very moment in time is probably best evidence of how our circumstances can change quickly. And that happens to us. And so we often have parents who come in and say, actually, this has happened, X has happened in our lives. We are now not in a position to afford this. We then go into negotiations. Our aim is to keep students in school. Ultimately, that's the aim. It's not always the case, and I understand that. There are certain circumstances in which there are real difficulties. There will also be conversations, and sometimes I say quite direct. They need to be open and honest conversations with parents to say, right, we need to talk about this more honestly, because we would like to be as clear with parents as we possibly can be that they need to be able to afford what they can afford. This doesn't come entirely free by any stretch, except for our full bursary students, of which we've got about 150 of them. But for everyone else, there is a certain amount of money they need to pay, and that's where this comes in, that constant assessment, the constant dialogue. And I think we said very early on, be in those conversations with the schools as early as you possibly can be open and honest and upfront, and that will help the process.
Thank you, Luke. Camilla, income thresholds. Some schools are looking at that now and are very transparent about what kind of threshold they will consider people for bursaries for. Can you shed any light on what those thresholds might look like from your experience of working in this area?
Yes, a few of the London day schools are doing this now. St Paul's has done it for a while. St Paul's Boys has done it for a while. Highgate is doing it now. I mean, the Lady Eleanor Hollis as well out in Hampton. I mean, it's starting. I guess it's probably a question that they're asked so often that it's worth giving parents some sort of guideline. So the schools who are giving income thresholds will say that the numbers that I've seen have been somewhere between a joint household income of less than £70,000 a year, up to about a joint income of less than £125,000, £130,000 a year, depending on the school. Some schools will acknowledge within that if you've got younger children as well, and will account for them. One school that I was looking at the other day had a pretty sophisticated matrix on their website. I think matrix is the word, sort of table on their website of your assets and your income, and actually tracking, if you've got up to £1 million in assets but no income, and then on the other sort of axis up to £150,000 in income but no assets, and so actually really allowing you quite clinically to anticipate where you might fall within what they're looking at. Of course, you then need to go through the means tested process, and I think all of these schools have finite pots that they can allocate for bursary provision. So it really does depend who else is asking for money that year and how schools can allocate it. But I think it's quite reassuring to parents to have at least an idea of where they might stand.
Thank you. I'm very conscious we've got a big audience. This is a tricky subject. I don't want to take up too much time asking my questions. I've got loads more, but if anyone would like to ask a question now, I think we should open up to the floor. There's one here.
So you just mentioned that the income of 70 to 130K is what you consider. Is it pre-tax or post-tax?
Pre-tax. Your gross income.
Okay.
Yeah, the gross income of your household.
Sure.
And that's, by the way, it's also worth adding there that if one of you is not working but could be, then that will be factored in. So the gross income as well as any potential income that perhaps isn't being realised at the moment.
I also wanted to ask about, so if, let's say, my kid goes to the school, but let's say after a few years, we are not in position to pay the fee. So what happens in that case?
I think I'll ask Luke that, if that's okay.
So that was what I was saying earlier. I think the best thing to have is an open dialogue with the school. I think you will find the majority of schools are pretty compassionate about their understanding of that, but it also comes with the reality of having those conversations about your financial position, and it depends on the reasons as to why that's happened. I mean, one of the things that I would like to comment on here, and particularly with this audience in London, is house prices. It's really interesting comparing those against the rest of the country at the moment, that actually in London we can talk about house prices in one way, talk about that with the rest of the country, and people raise their eyebrows and think, and you're asking for a bursary? How does that work? So I think there's a lot of nuanced and subtle conversations around that need to take place. But I would suggest being direct and open with the school that you're dealing with.
Philippa, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so all of our bursary pupils are reviewed every year. And what we say about our bursary is it can change, but it won't change if your financial circumstances don't change. So the review each year is to check that it should be the same. So if a family situation changes for the better or worse, the bursary could go up or down, and it does. So we do find a lot that our students, they will go down or up on the bursary depending on family situations. We also recommend to parents that if something happens, so for instance, one of the parents loses their job, that they contact us instead of waiting for the review. And again, like Luke said, it's having those conversations straight away rather than sort of battling on with a difficult situation.
Thank you. Yes, there's a question here as well.
Hello, it might not be a question for you both. Speaking to some schools, they offer scholarships and bursaries, but don't allow you to apply for the scholarship. So you'll apply for a bursary, I won't say the school, you'll apply for a bursary, and then you're awarded the scholarship based on like an audition for music. Is that normal practice for scholarships? Should they be separate applications?
That's a very good question, and one I would have asked as well, but I wanted you to ask it. So differences between scholarships and bursaries when you apply, how it works. Philippa, why don't you take that?
I think it probably depends on school to school as to what's normal practice. For us, we need a conscious application for a bursary and a conscious application for a scholarship. A bursary candidate who then wins the scholarship, they don't receive any more money. It's just that their bursary is then split into a 5% and then an additional whatever. So in fact, if you already have a bursary, getting a scholarship, it's a title rather than any increased financial value. This is on admissions, incoming. We certainly have students, once they're in the school, where we award internal scholarships that are recommended by the staff in the school rather than applied for by parents. And again, they are a title rather than a financial value.
I know Luke said while he was speaking that they don't actually offer that many scholarships at Christ Hospital because they have such a high percentage of bursaries. So I'm going to ask Camilla, what is a part? I mean, Harrow, that's very clear. The landscape generally, how does that look?
I think the landscape is changing and has changed a lot. Until maybe even 5 years ago, usually a scholarship came with a substantial fee remission, and bursaries were not so prominent. I think now that lots and lots of schools like Harrow have separated that out so that you don't get only those children who have scholarships getting the fee remissions. You've now got two separate applications. In most cases, at most schools, two separate applications. One is, if you are able to give my child a normal non-scholarship offer, we will need bursary support with that. And then another element of the application is, my child would like to apply for a scholarship. But those two things aren't nearly as entwined as they were a few years ago, because, as I say, schools are just trying to get the money and the funding to the right families rather than it always going to those kids who have won scholarships.
Thank you, Camilla. That's really helpful. I think there was a question over there. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to be really clear. I've got two really quick questions. So if your child is offered the full bursary, for example, from the sort of year 6, is that all the way through the academic sort of 5 years? Is that, or did you say that was means tested every year? My second question is, you talked about sort of if you are able to sort of start off in a really good financial position and then you find yourself that you're unable to pay the school fees later on. Could you give a clear example if somebody has been in that situation and has the child been able to stay in the school, please?
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Luke that question, if that's okay.
Yeah, so the first one, your child, let's say year 6, gets access to a school, you're on a full bursary. The school, I imagine, would say this stands as long as your financial circumstances don't change. I'm hoping for a win in the lottery. It doesn't always happen. In fact, more regularly than not, it doesn't. But things change for people, and you might be in a position where there's an inheritance or there's a major life event that means that your financial position changes. In that circumstance, I would imagine the school might say, well, there is a nominal amount, or we would expect you to pay this because your situation has changed. And that's the yearly review that I think both of our institutions operate on. The other one was, yes, I can give you probably a number of circumstances where we personally as a school have had families who have fallen on even more difficult times in some circumstances, and the compassionate grounds on which that child has remained in the school. It's normally until the next sort of significant moment in their school career. So I would say for us, that's students coming at year 7, it would be year 11, the end of year 11, what we call our Greater Erasmus year. They would get to the end of that and then it would be reviewed and the conversation would be had in a different way, but they would get them to a point at which the child can then leave the school with qualifications and go on to another institution if they needed to. That's worth saying. And I think that illustrates possibly some of the nuanced, I mentioned it before, the nuanced conversations that take place in these circumstances. This is part of the reason for this panel is that these conversations aren't clean cut by any suggestion. And I think, the sense of saying to someone, right, you're coming in, you've got a 25% bursary, that's it for the remainder of your time at the school, off we go. It can't work that way. It needs to be more organic, more iterative than possibly that suggests. So it's all about the dialogue between the school and the parents.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one thing in relation, which goes back to original assessment. Philippa, you were talking about home visits when we were chatting earlier. Could you just explain what home visits involves, and would they happen every year in the way that the bursary is looked at every year?
So when the bursary analysis is done, you'll be asked to submit financial information. Different schools do it in different ways in terms of how they analyse that financial information and who does it. So we predominantly do it in-house, and then there is an external company who will assist us to do home visits for some families. It slightly depends on how complex the financial information is. If it's very straightforward, then we can do it completely in-house. If it's slightly more complex, then an external company that we would use would potentially do a home visit and do home interviews. Does that answer that question?
I think it does.
Yeah.
I think it does, and I hope everyone was aware, or those who weren't aware about home visits before are aware. It's important, I think, to appreciate that. Any more questions from the floor? Yes.
Good afternoon. Just a quick question on the incomes you assess on. Today, everyone's been talking about 2 incomes. What if there's only one? And is it just the same level, or is there different considerations?
Luke, again?
Yeah, so number of different familial situations, aren't there? We have single-parent families, we have adoptive families, all these different territories. I think different schools approach this in different ways. Where there are, as Camilla was saying, where there are 2 parents in the household, and both of them could be working, I imagine it would be assessed on what could be the income. There are other circumstances when one parent can't, so it would just be assessed on one. So, like I say, it's worth having the conversation with the school, establishing your personal circumstances and the reasoning behind that. And very often it's entirely understandable. And I think it's worth noting here that the majority of schools that I know of manage these conversations exceptionally empathetically, really compassionately, particularly with the full bursary pieces, because some of the circumstances that those children are coming from to a school of significant note, and you can mention any name of any school in this hall at the moment that I would count amongst that, and for them to come through those systems from backgrounds that are challenging, I think any school in here would look at that and think, right, okay, there are reasons for all of these things. This child needs to be in this environment. They will excel. We can do something really, really exciting with this child, but it requires the openness and honesty from the get-go.
I think it's fair to say, and I'm going to defer to Camilla on this. To answer that question absolutely directly, does £70,000 to £120,000 joint income apply to a person?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's done much more holistically and much more humanly and humanely than that.
Thank you. There's a question at the front here. Yeah.
Yes. My question is that when you give the consent to apply for bursary, when you initially apply for the year entry, if the bursary application failed, would that affect the child being selected, or?
When you say fail, do you mean, what do you mean by fail? Because there are different ways it can fail.
You're saying that the children has to be to a certain level that they can be offered bursary, and then they will be means tested. But I mean, because we give a consent that we may need bursary, and if we say the children doesn't meet the entry requirement, and then are they being tested the same way as if people doesn't need the bursary?
I think the question is really, are the two kept separate? So your ability to get in on merit and your ability to pay for the fees, how are those two things treated?
There is no difference. Whether you apply for a bursary or not, you are treated exactly the same in the admissions process. The actual bursary analysis isn't done until we're quite far down the route of thinking that we probably do want to offer your child a place. So it's not quite needs blind, but it is quite close. That we have a list of applicants who we like and we think we want to offer places to. At that point, we'll do some means testing and actually find out what the actual figures are. What we then tend to do is go ahead and make an offer, and we'll either make an offer with a bursary that's unconditional, or we'll make an offer of a bursary that may be conditional on a scholarship. If we're not going to offer the bursary, we're not offering the place. But the reason will have been because we're not offering the place, not because we're not offering the bursary, if that makes sense.
Thank you, that does make sense. Any other questions? Yes, there's one at the back, on the back left there.
Thank you. Sorry, I might have missed this. Two questions. One is about what proportion of students that apply get the bursary? And the next question is it possible to get the bursary once you've further down, once the child's already in the school, and if circumstances change? Sorry, I wasn't clear on that.
Absolutely. I think it will obviously differ from school to school. So let's start with Luke, because you've just spoken, Philippa. Let's start with Luke. What percentage of applicants for a bursary don't get the bursary?
That's quite a hard question to answer, actually, in honesty. So we operate CH, Christ Hospital operates quite a significant bursarial support system, and we have children from all sorts of levels of bursary, for want of a better phrase. So it's not that they wouldn't get a bursary, it's where that bursary would sit. I suppose that's a better way of saying it. That's going to be different for different schools, though. And it wouldn't be, I think, coming back to Philippa's point just now, I think in the process of selecting the school that you're going for your children, and there may be a number, you may put in for a number of different schools, you just need to make sure that you're not going for a school that is academically or whatever on any level too much of a challenge for your child, and a bursary on top of that, because I think that's where you're setting up potentially for disappointment and for real difficulty. You need to be pitching it right. I suppose we say the same thing about university applications as well. When you sit down with your UCAS application form, you choose a number of universities on there, one always as the insurance offer. You need to be very careful that you're not setting your child up. If your child is not an Eton or a Harrow or a CH or whatever, if you've not got a child who's going to get there, don't go for that and the bursary, because that's going to be a real disappointment. In terms of the other piece, we review on a yearly basis. So if a parent falls on hard times, they would come and talk to us, and we'd work it through from there.
Yes, and I think it's fair to say that all schools, I think there are very few schools that wouldn't review on a yearly basis. Any other questions? Got three there. So if you...
Thank you for offering all the information. That's really clear. But then I'm just thinking, the house price of the current situation in London. So do you treat the house that we're living as a liability, which is a mortgage? Do you treat it as a liability, or do you treat it as an asset?
That's a very good question, Philippa. Do you know the answer?
No, it's a short answer. I don't know the answer to that. I think that kind of thing is dealt with by the finance department who do the analysis. Certainly rather than somebody like me. I don't know about Luke. I might just hand that question over to him. No, the sort of real nuts and bolts. I do know that it is complicated, and it is quite complicated to have a very expensive house and a low mortgage. That will skew the calculations quite a bit, as does a second property. That skews the calculations a lot.
I'll come to Luke in a minute, but Camilla, when you get consultancy clients who have expensive houses but a mortgage, do you generally say, do you know what, you've probably not got a chance, you own an expensive house?
Yeah, I mean, schools are quite open about saying that they will expect you to remortgage to release some of the capital from that house if that would pay for school fees. So when they say they're looking at your assets, that includes the amount of money that you have in your house. Maybe you do have a 30% or a 40% mortgage, but equally, if that means that you've got 60 or 70% of the house is capital that you might be able to free up, then they'll expect you to do so. And second houses, I mean, yeah, it's not, it's the way that the schools will look at it and the way that you should look at it is, could I sell that to pay for school fees? If the answer is yes, then you're very unlikely to be given bursarial assistance.
Luke, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that's absolutely spot on. I do think it's a challenge. The one point that I would make is where your house is located. Where if it was a necessity for work or something like that, if to move it, to move or to sell or whatever it might be, would completely uproot your family. I think that's a more subtle question, but yeah, a second property is definitely an indicator that somebody could afford independent school fees, to my mind.
Excellent, thank you. We've got time for a couple more questions. There was one lady here who you slightly, yeah, that's the one. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick one. So in terms of scholarships, other than it being a title, what other benefits are associated with scholarships?
Yes, that's a very good question. A, what kind of benefit is associated with the scholarship? And B, what is the kind of payback? What's the commitment expected of the child? Philippa, perhaps you could address that.
The benefit of somebody with a scholarship is that there may be a program that they're specifically encouraged to do. So if it's an academic, there are various sort of academic things going on in Harrow that are outside the lessons that those students would be encouraged to do, and they would have a tutor to really sort of monitor that they're doing them. However, they are not exclusive to just the scholars. So there is no program at all which only a pocket of students can go to. It's just that the scholars are perhaps encouraged to go to, and their progress and engagement with that is monitored. Certainly something like a sports scholar may have other commitments outside the school. Very often our sports scholars are involved in clubs outside the school, academies or sort of rugby clubs, something like that. Being a scholar facilitates that. It's much more normal if somebody's a scholar and they're having to go out of boarding school to do that particular activity. That's absolutely fine. So it does sort of free them up a little bit, makes it much easier. There are some funds for activities and trips. It's much easier to get those funds if you're on a bursary, if you have a scholarship in that thing. So if you're an art scholar and there is an art trip going on, it's quite likely we will support the art scholar to go on that art trip. It's directly in line with their scholarship. If they're on a bursary, even if it's a small one, we would still try and support. In terms of commitment, there would always be a commitment to having the title scholar to lead by example, to show commitment to the field that you've been awarded the scholarship in, to show engagement and good behaviour, things like that. So that's the sort of commitment on the side of the scholar.
Excellent, thank you. We've got time for one last question.
Thank you. Sorry if somebody already asked, but is there a sibling policy? Meaning, I was on a website of another boarding school, and they said if you had a sibling and you'd applied for a bursary, could you make that second bursary application to another school? Now, is that a general rule, or is that school by school specific? Or
Camilla, are you able to answer that?
all of these rules are school by school specific. There's no, there are certain ways or patterns that are emerging within this landscape, but every school will have a different attitude. And actually, I don't know, I mean, you're probably in a better position to talk about what your schools do in terms of if there is a younger sibling or two, then how do you treat that?
So if you were to get a bursary place at CH, for example, I think the chances are that if your second child fulfilled the academic criteria to come to the school, that bursary would then extend. And what would probably be taken into consideration is the amount of money that you were paying for the first bursary as well. So I think it's not quite buy one, get one free, but it's that sort of territory. The understanding of a school and a parent's financial position is pretty intricate. The where you are then dividing that, I think it would become more complicated. That's not to say that it wouldn't happen, but I think that the process, you'd have to go through it all again, all of the paperwork, all of the demonstration of your financial position. But you're right to ask, because I think one of the things that really comes out of the conversations that I know I've had today is that no one school fits every single family per se. You could have two completely different children, one at a choir school, for example, one at Harrow, and it's having those conversations individually with the schools.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we've got no more time for any more questions, but thank you so much to our panel. They've been really insightful. You are welcome to come and talk to us downstairs, the Good Schools Guide, and obviously if Luke and Philippa have got time to speak to them. But thank you all for coming, and wishing you all lots of luck.